Green Book is a chronicle of little-known American history, in particular African-American history that we have. It's been 80 years, and we're just starting to talk about it now. So this is 46 Hempstead Street. I will get to all of that. I heard you grew up on Hempstead Street. Was that you, John? These are the 10 sites. These are the 10 sites in New London that I found. One's called the Gertrude. Okay, 785 Bank Street, 46 Hempstead Street, 73 Hempstead Street, Shapley Street, Brewer Street, Boone's Beauty Shop on Main Street, the Mohegan Hotel, the Crocker House, and the Lighthouse Inn. These places were, the X's that you see are the years that they were listed in the book. And you can see they kind of come and go. Some are only here for a couple of years. Starting in 38, they started to, there were 5 of them. You'll notice there's one continuous line here to 1955, and then there's a continuous line here. That's an interesting phenomenon. There's a woman named Eva C. Whittle who ran 785 Bank Street, didn't live there, but she ran that tourist home, and in 1955 she moved to the yellow house that you saw at the beginning, and she ran it here for a run of about 30 years. The red blocks are years for which we have no books, or at least they have no books on file. I got all of this information from New York Public Library digital collections. You can go there too. You can read every single book that they have. There's about 25 of them. They don't have all of them, but you can see every page if you want to do that. And anyway, I went through those books, and I came up with the names and the addresses and the buildings. Some of them are in existence, and some of them are gone. This is a map. I love this map. It's a zoomable map from 1911. It's actually hand-drawn. You can actually, some guy actually went down and drew the windows on all those buildings. But I love it. You can zoom it. It's great. I wanted it to here so that you can kind of see where they were located. Here's 7085 Bank Street. This is 46 Hempstead. There were 2 on Hempstead, 46 and 73. The home of the Bachelor on 20 Brewer Street. That's still in existence. The Gertrude on Bank Street. Boone's Beauty Shop is gone. The Crocker House is still there. 45 Shapley Street is gone. The Mohegan Hotel is still there, and I already mentioned that. I also mentioned the Lighthouse Inn. This is Mr. Victor Hugo Green. He's the man for whom the Green Book is named. He's a hero. This is the first edition. This is the introduction to the first edition in 1937. It's even in green ink. This is Victor and his wife, Alma. When Victor died in 1960, Alma Green took over and continued it for a few more years and then turned it over to another younger guy whose picture I don't have here. This is kind of a summary of what the Green Book did. It was a travel guide, but it was also a survival guide. This was the origin of the phrase, "Don't leave home without it." When folks who look like me traveled from here to California, it wasn't an issue. But for people of color, it was an issue. The white travelers had no difficulty in getting accommodations, but with the Negro, this is an excerpt from the book, by the way. There's a lot of material like this throughout the years. It has been different. Before the advent of Negro Travel Guide, had to depend on word of mouth, and many times accommodations were not available. Now things are different. The Negro traveler can depend on the Green Book for all the information he wants and has a wide selection to choose from. Hence, this guide has made traveling more popular without encountering embarrassing situations. The language that he uses, that Mr. Green uses, especially in the beginning of this, is very, very kind. There are other words for what people experienced when they were traveling. Embarrassing is a very nice way to put it. It was more like humiliating, degrading, racism, segregation. In fact, in many areas, it was an American apartheid. That's what it was. We don't like to call it that, but that's what it was. This is the 1963-64 edition, which I think Gene had. And here they've changed a little bit. And this is the chronicle of change in America, change among the African-American community. Now he's calling it for vacation without aggravation. We're not talking about embarrassment, because in 63-64, the Civil Rights Movement had taken hold, and they were about to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Things were changing. I heard somebody mention Esso. This is an excerpt. Esso plays a very important part. It's actually Standard Oil of New Jersey. They recognized that the African American community had money and they wanted to spend it, and they decided that they would get on board with the Green Book and get on board. They were the only oil company that provided African American opportunities to run the business, to own the gas station. They also were partners with Mr. Green in advertising and in distributing the book. You could go to an Esso station and you can get a copy of the Green Book. These, by the way, were not, they didn't distribute. You couldn't buy these in a bookstore. You had to get them from Mr. Green or by word of mouth, or you had to go to like an Esso station or someplace that would carry them. And Esso was in the forefront of that. These are two very important guys from Esso. This is James Jackson. He wrote that article, the article that you just saw, and this is Wendell Alston. They were the special representatives to the black community from Esso, and they went around and, again, were very supportive of Mr. Green's efforts. And they said, with Esso products, your car will take you there and bring you back, while the Green Book tells you where you may stop while there. Bless the Green Book and its service. When contemplating a trip, you should write Victor Green in New York for his Green Book and go to the Esso Touring Service for road maps and route directions. The title of that article, you may have seen, was Where Are You Going to Stop? Okay, and that's exactly what it was all about. Again, for us, for people like me to go to California, you could stop anywhere. If you were a person of color, you had to know, before you left, you had to know where you were going to stop, where are you going to eat, where are you going to buy gasoline, where are you going to use the bathroom. Okay, all of those things were not available. You had to plan ahead. All right, now we come to New London. This is the 1938 edition. These are the listings of New London in that first year. The home of the Bachelor on Brewer Street, William Gamble's on 45 Shapley Street, Hempstead Cottage, 73 Hempstead, the Gertrude at 88 Bank Street, and Mrs. Eva Whittle. You're going to become familiar with that name. The Gertrude was a tough one. I couldn't find anything on why it was called the Gertrude. There's very little history on this, but you'll see, I finally discovered what I think is the solution. 1941, the businesses came in and out. Now there are only 3 listings. And again, here's Mrs. Whittle. There's 73 Hempstead Street and the home of the Bachelor. 1948, again, we see Mrs. Eva Whittle at 7085 Bank Street, and we have a new entry. We have the Beauty Parlor. This is the only business that's listed in New London in any of the Green Books, and it was Boone's Beauty Parlor at 96 Main Street, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. 1949, we're down to 2. 1951 to 54, Mrs. Eva Whittle, there she is. 1955 to 62, Mrs. Eva Whittle, she's the only one. Okay, now she's moved. She's at 46 Hempstead Street. She's at that yellow house that you saw at the beginning. 1963-64, well, we have the Crocker House, the Lighthouse Inn, the Mohican Hotel, and Mrs. Whittle. And why do we have the Crocker House, the Lighthouse Inn, and the Mohican Hotel? Because it's now about, if it's not in effect yet, it's going to be against the law to discriminate on the basis of race, okay? So now we have the big hotels coming in. It's to their credit, but where were they for the first 30 years? Okay, 785 Bank Street. This is Mrs. Eva C. Whittle. Her house was located here. She didn't actually live there. She lived in, someone new here, I think she lived in Groton or in Noank. I had her listed several places, but she did not live in this house. But she rented it out. That's gone. We're standing at the end of Montauk Avenue looking at Bank Street. Jefferson Avenue is over here, and the CVS, you may recognize that. This is another shot of 785 Bank Street. I have no photographs. If anybody has any photographs, if you see anything, if you hear any names or you have any photographs of any of this, I would love to get it because they're very hard to find. We think that this may be, one of these 2 buildings is 785. 771 and 773 is right here. So it's one of these 2. I think it may be this blue one. In the first floor was a Chinese restaurant for a time, and it was Ferrasi's fruit stand for a while, and upstairs were apartments. This is another view of 785 Bank Street. That was in the 1960s. This is 1970s. You can see Beat Brothers here. Again, it's one of these buildings right here. We're looking down Town Hill, and you can see St. Mary's School and St. Mary's Church in the background. Again, 785 Bank Street. It's gone. 46 Hempstead Street. This was where Mrs. Whittle moved in 1955. Beautiful home. It was built around the turn of the century. It was previously built by a woman, a carpenter named Archer. His daughter lived there until Mrs. Whittle moved in. She was the principal of Namyog School. Number 73 Hempstead Street. This one has a little background. If you're familiar with New London, Hempstead Street, there are 5 buildings, well, there's 4 now. In 1842, an abolitionist named Civilian Haley decided to act on his beliefs, and he wanted to provide housing for free blacks who were being denied housing by everybody else. So he built 5 houses in 1842, all together on Hempstead Street. If you go on Hempstead Street, there's a stand and a placard there that describes all that. In fact, it looks like this. That's Hempstead Street in the background. And number 73 Hempstead Street was one of those houses. And how interesting is it that it was built, this was the center of one of the first black communities in New London. This is the home of the bachelor, Mrs. Mattie E. Bell. She ran it for about 10 years. It's on Brewer Street. It's still in existence. This is in the street where I believe City Flats is operating right now, where they're restoring buildings. I would love to see them restore this building. Why not this building? This has a historic significance, and it's in pretty sad shape right now. I'm wondering I don't know if it looked like this in 1938-48, or if this section is an addition. You can see the original lines of the house, and you can see somebody's been doing some restorations right nearby. Okay, here's another view of the same building, the home of the bachelor. Now we get to Shapley Street, 45 Shapley Street. Shapley Street no longer exists. It used to run from Main Street up to Huntington Street, and the number 45 tourist home was right about here. I use this map. This is that same old map just to give you an idea about where it is. This is the Buckley School, St. James Church, Mohegan Hotel. This is Main Street. Okay, Shapley Street runs right here. And the house was bulldozed during the urban renewal project in the 60s. That's right. There's the house right there. I don't have any pictures of it. I'm dying for a picture of it. All I have is that hand-drawn. You can see that somebody actually drew the windows in that thing. And that's the house right there. This is Shapley Street today. It would have been right about here. We're standing, my back is to the Buckley School, the Multicultural Magnet School, and that's the senior housing on the corner of Federal Street. St. James Church is right over here. Shapley Street would have gone in about there. This is approximately where, this is an aerial view. The 45 Shapley Street would have been right about there. This is the senior housing. Right there, there's Buckley School, St. James Church. The Gertrude. This is 88 Bank Street, across the street from the Hygienic. All right, the doorway is right here. It's a walk up to, there were 4 apartments up there. I couldn't figure out why it was called the Gertrude. I finally went down to the city directories, and I'm going through the city directories to find out who lived at 88. Well, I found out that Mrs. Gertrude Diana lived at 88 at that time. I guess it was named for her. That's the only thing I know. A couple of years later, there are 4 apartments there. A couple of years later, there was another guy named Charles Derry who lived there. His wife's name was Gertrude, and there was a 3rd Gertrude living there. So I don't know, but that's all I could come up with. There's number 88. This is where it's located. Hot Rod's Cafe is over here. This is Roberts, the old Roberts, and there it is right there. Okay. Boone's Beauty Shop was the only business that was located, that was mentioned, listed on in the Green Book. And I have no pictures of it. It's now Eugene O'Neill Drive. All of these buildings are gone. This is where it is now, approximately. It's a parking lot. New London is good at making parking lots. You can see this is the First Congregational Church. That's the phone company building. That's the Harris building, I think. This is an aerial view. Boone's Beauty Shop would have been somewhere along here. One of the problems that we have with all this stuff, before I give it all away, is that we have no photographs, and we don't have very many people that we can talk to directly about this because they're gone. It was 80 years ago. Okay. Until last night, I was going through some material, and this jumped off the page at me. And if you look at the 3rd name from the bottom, It says Spencer C. Lancaster at 96 Main Street. Boone's Beauty Shop was at 96 Main Street. Mr. Lancaster, would you stand up, please? Mr. Lancaster was living in that house. What are the chances that, and not only was he living there, he's on the panel here tonight. Okay, so that was just amazing.
And I was there.
Yes, and you were born there. Yes.
She was born there.
Right. Okay. As we get into the 60s now, the Civil Rights Law was passed, and the Voting Rights Law was passed, and the Green Book started to include knowing your rights. They would do 2 or 3 pages of, if you were traveling, you need to know your rights. Segregation was no longer legally allowed. And you may notice this is Adam Clayton Powell in that picture there. Now in 63, 64, here comes the Crocker House. Largely, I think, because of the passage of that, or the imminent passage of that, the larger hotels joined in. Okay, the Crocker House, that was Mr. William T. Reagan was the manager at that time, or the president of that. Lighthouse Inn was the William Ronick and the Mohegan Hotel. Okay, that was Gene Venitos. He was the owner at that time. Well, you might recognize this picture. I'm flipping through the book in 1960, and I came across this picture. So I'm flipping through it, and I thought, my God, this is such a wonderful historical record of this. There's the ad. And as I flipped through that book, 2 pages after this photograph, I found this. Now, you might recognize that. Yeah. That was where Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968, 2 pages away from his photograph. I couldn't believe it when I saw that. Okay, this is the website for the New York Public Library digital collections. These are the books that they have online. You can also buy some of them. You can buy facsimile copies for about 10 or 12 bucks if you're interested, but you can go to this website and you can read them for free. Okay, this was a statement that was part of, it was in there repeatedly actually, from Victor Green. It says, there will be a day sometime in the near future when this guide will not have to be published. That is when we as a race will have equal opportunities and privileges in the United States. It will be a great day for us to suspend this publication, for then we can go wherever we please and without embarrassment. But until that time comes, we shall continue to publish this information for your convenience each year. And I just want to end with I wanted you to hear that, and maybe to propose a question to kind of summarize, maybe an answer to him, and maybe to summarize what we have here. And it's an age-old question that's been asked by every traveler, black or white, but it has a special reverence here in regard to the Green Book. And the question is, are we there yet? Not yet. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. I have other information here that I will just, if you're interested, learn more about New London history, here are a couple of things. I have this all on a handout. I'll just go through it. That's me. I have a few people to thank: Diane Casey, Fuji Fulgaris, and Nicole Thomas. Special thanks to Kevin Booker. Where is he? Okay. And the Groton Library. The listing of the people that I have associated with these houses. This list is not complete. I'm interested in more names, and I would love to have the opportunity to talk to some of the people. If people know these people, we're going to rely on oral traditions, and we have one of them right here, to continue to tell this story. The story needs to be told. There's Mrs. Whittle again. Brewer Street. I didn't have your name on here because I didn't have time to get it in. I would have. There's Mrs. Whittle again. Shapley Street. And these are heroes. These are the people, these are the names that are mainly associated with the New London listings in the Green Book. There's a list of them right here. And that's it. I'm done. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. All right, awesome. And thank you very much for being here. First of all, I'd like to thank the Groton Public Library for having this event, for sponsoring this event. And Betty Ann Reiter, it's good to see you here as well. Let's give her a round of applause since she's one of the main reasons why everything was created. Ann Campbell, another round of applause for her as well. And Sean. Yeah, absolutely. This evening we have, as you can see, some extraordinary panelists here. And it's going to be an awesome time, awesome discussion. I know we're going to have a great time. We're going to dig a little deep. If my panelists here, if you can introduce yourself, starting off with our hero, our pioneer in New London County, and just say a few words about who you are and how you're connected to the community.
My name is Spencer Lancaster. I'm a New London young man. I say young man. I'll be 91 years old next month. And I saw some of that on the screen. I'm very familiar with what was seen on that screen. I lived in New London all my life. I went to the service in World War II. I got discharged in 1948, and I settled back into New London. And when I come up in New London, I was in an integrated neighborhood. I grew up in an Italian section of town, and we were all one big family. I went to high school, graduated from Chapman Tech, went into the service. No color was mentioned in that area. The Negroes, as we were referred to back then, settled on Hill Street, Shapley Street, Main Street, Stony Hill, and that's where they settled. I was brought up in the Italian neighborhood down on Shore Street, in your neighborhood, yes. And we didn't have that color problem, and we were called colored, not black. But the schools were integrated here, I said, and I played 3 sports. We had that problem. My first experience with segregation is when I went into the United States Army. The Army, when I went in, was segregated at that time. And I was upset because I never faced that kind of situation. And I know I left Fort Dix, New Jersey one night on a sleeper train. Got up the next morning to go to breakfast. And my first taste of segregation. When I got in the dining car, the man pulled the curtain. And I asked the question, why did you pull that curtain? He said, well, we just crossed the Mason-Dixon line. That hurt me to my heart. That hurt me to my heart. I said, what do you mean? You've got to separate me. And he said, the Negroes got to sit over in his corner and we pull the curtain out of him. Well, I turned down the meal. And he kept being mad. I said, no, I didn't order that. I didn't order that. I kept sending it back just out of spite. And when I landed in Fayetteville, North Carolina, the first sign I saw was the drinking fountain says blacks only. And I had a hard time. I got in some trouble because of my mouth, but I couldn't stand it. And when I came back to Connecticut in 1948, when I got out of the service, thank God for Harry Truman, believe me. He's the one that integrated the services. I came back to New London, and I went to work for a car dealership. This is my experience. And back then, the Negro, or the colored, all they could do was wash cars and polish cars and sweep the floors. And I went to work for a Jewish family, the Linda Motors. And God bless them. They weren't afraid to put a black man up front. I had a good head on my shoulders, I thought. I could run a business. And they put me to be front man in their business. And I ran their business for almost 60 years. And and not bragging, but I was good at what I did. I used to end up #1 in New England in sales, in the top 50 in the United States in sales, and I ran the business for almost 50 years. But I had discrimination. That's the only kind of discrimination I ever felt. But when I come up, none. And I saw these homes, my aunt, Mrs. Whittle, Mrs. Boone, I knew them all. You know? And my first home apartment was at 96 Main Street. That's where my daughter was born. 96 Main was a safe house. I didn't know that till tonight when that gentleman gave me. And I still have the same phone number. That was that.
Yes.
Yeah, you go right ahead, sweetie.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Florence Clark. I was born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina. I was a product of Jim Crow. That's all I knew growing up. From being restricted to our village, which was 3 blocks long. And the reason why I say our village is because every parent, every mother, every father raised every child that was in that radius of 3 blocks. I went to segregated elementary school, and I hope I can get through this because it was Buste Elementary School right across the street from Emmanuel, AME. I played on the steps of the Emmanuel Church where the 9 people were killed. I went to segregated elementary school, high school. I was able to go to college because the city of Charleston, well, the state of South Carolina did not want any blacks going to the University of South Carolina, so they gave 10 scholarships to South Carolina State, which was all black, and 10 to the University of South Carolina. I was blessed to be able to win one of the scholarships. When I graduated, I started teaching in a little town called St. George, South Carolina. I hope nobody here tonight is from St. George, because it was a turning point for me because I was one of the students who demonstrated. I marched, I got arrested, I got hit with the fire hose, I was set in a cage for animals. They were getting ready to send us to penitentiary, and thank God for the NAACP of Orangeburg, South Carolina, who paid the bonds for 750 students who had demonstrated. When I started teaching, I was an idealist because I had decided that I was not going to go through what I had gone through, only to almost succumb to living in a town that was predominantly very racist and loaded with Ku Klux Klan. There were an interesting story, and I'll turn it over. Once the Civil Rights Bill was passed and, you could go and eat anywhere, my husband and I stopped at a restaurant in one of the towns, and it took the waitress forever to come and serve him. And so I got out of the car to find out what was going on. And evidently, he didn't see the sign on the door because it said any purchases made by would be donated to the Ku Klux Klan. So I said, let's get out of here. It's time to go. So it was that atmosphere. I finally left there, went back home to Charleston, and started teaching there. And I'm taking a quantum leap now. I came to Connecticut in 1968, thinking that things would be different in the North. Not really. So I'll be able to share perhaps some of my experiences once I came to Connecticut.
My name is James Mitchell. I was born in Oakland, California, and then my family moved back to Texas, where I remained in school until grade 10, first grade through 10th grade. In Texas, I attended a segregated elementary school, segregated junior high school, and I entered my first year in a segregated high school. The reason I came to Connecticut is because my mother, who was a teacher in Texas in a segregated all-black elementary school, remarried and came to New London to get a better job. And so in 1962, my mother came, and with her husband came earlier. I came in 1962 by bus with my two sisters and brothers on a Greyhound to Connecticut, to New London. And I remember distinctly my mother making sure that my sister sat next to me and my brother sat over in the other seat because it was a more than 24-hour trip. And the concern was for my sister's safety. So I'm 15, my sister's 14, and my brother's 11. We lived at on East Street, 14 East Street rear, and then we moved to 29 Hempstead Street. So I'm really enjoying the history of Hempstead Street because that's a significant street. Segregation until I came to New London High School in 1962. It was a culture shock for me because in Texas, in the segregated South, everyone I knew was black. The doctors were black, the teachers were black, the firemen that I knew were black. Everyone that was professional in my world was black. And so when I came to New London High School in '62, and that was just before the '64 laws and the '65, and just before the Mohegan Hotel and all the famous hotels then got on the bandwagon to make sure there was a place to stay, it was a culture shock for me being in a classroom of maybe 2 or 3 blacks in a class of 30 or 40 people. So it took me some adjustment, but my family was there for support. And so I graduated from New London High School in 1964. I spoke at our 50th high school reunion for the graduating class 50 years later. During that time, I went to the military, came back from the military, graduated, went back to Texas for college, graduated in Texas with my bachelor's, graduated at Rhode Island URI with my master's, and UConn with my doctorate. I've spent 38 years in the Groton Public School system, starting as a teacher, ending up as the superintendent of schools, and I've continued to think that education is really the key and the success, the key that will get us to the next step. There are other things that I'm sure I can say, but that's just a brief history of where I am in the community, and I'm still in Groton, and I'm committed to Groton, and I think that Groton and New London have a lot to offer in spite of where we are today and what's going on around us politically. That's affecting all of us and making us look as if we have not made progress, when in fact we have made progress, and it's just the political culture, I think, that's creating the unrest that seems to be pouring out all over us right now.
Well, I guess it's my turn. My name is Lonnie Braxton, and I kind of have a bit of everyone who's spoken. I grew up in Mississippi during the height of the Civil Rights Movement. I'm the oldest of 2 children. My parents were married for almost 14 years without having children. So when I came along, not only was it a blessing, in a way it was a curse, because my father often reminded my mother and myself and my sister, we had it made before you came along. And I cannot tell you in words that when Mr. Lancaster spoke, what it touched. It touched something in me that if you've had the ability to travel through this country as a person of color, there is no way, even today, that it will not touch or impact you. Because when he had on the uniform to serve this country and put his life on the line, it owed him something that he had personally paid for. And I, too, have had that experience. You know, he said 1948. That's the year I was born. In 1967, I find myself in Norfolk, Virginia, in my Navy uniform. Civil Rights Act's passed. But guess what? I won't rent to you because you're black. Now, I didn't avoid the draft. I didn't head to Canada. I didn't hold up my leg to a doctor saying I had a bone spur. I joined. And that's not a barb. That's a fact. It's a true fact. You know, and I can remember being a little kid standing in front of my parents' yard watching the troops on their way to Central High and Little Rock to integrate that school. There was a man by the name of the husband and wife, and the woman's name was Daisy Bates, friends of my stepfather, who were instrumental in making sure those kids were prepared every day to go into battle at Central High. When Emmett Till was killed, I can remember being a little kid and my father pointing to one of the men saying, he is one of the men who killed Emmett Till. And the woman lived in my hometown freely until she died. So when I read history, I have a weird take on it. You know, I came here 50 years ago in about 3 months. And I came here because when I was a little kid in Mississippi, and I had a different life in Mississippi, as you said, sir, you lived in a neighborhood that was all black. Everybody around you was black. But we had a crazy thing going on in Mississippi because we had a constitution that was written in 1890 that really codified and gave the black codes, which is where the Jim Crow laws came from. And that was the ability to just really put a stranglehold not on only black folk, because my father used to have a saying, you can't move either with your foot on my neck. That's right. So they were trapped too. We had the ability to see doctors, no lawyers, to see a dentist, to see a shopkeeper, and they all looked like us. But at the same time, that person could not move outside of that community. If that person was fortunate enough to raise enough money to buy a great car, he couldn't. How could he have that car? You know, how could he have that house? So no matter what you did, there were still constraints. When you think about the South was all of America, not just the South. And I'll digress a little because I'm sure that when you think about not being able to live but on these two streets, how many of you have heard about sundown towns? That up until the 70s, they were still ringing a bell or blowing a whistle, which meant that you should be out of town by night. You did not stay in this town. And I hear young people today, you know, use words in a kind of flippant way and use an N-word in a fashion that disgusts me. Because when they use that word and I hear Mr. Lancaster's voice, they don't understand why I can't use it. You will never tame or own that word. Because so long as people like him have lived on this earth and made those sacrifices, I dishonor a person like that if I hear someone use it, I don't say something. It is a terrible thing. But don't think that all of us had the same lives living in the South. I had the ability to go to a segregated school from kindergarten to high school. I graduated in 1966. It was still segregated. However, we were lucky enough to have nuns from my kindergarten to my 8th grade. And these women dedicated their lives to us. I have a 6th grade teacher by the name of Sister Carmelina, she's in her 90s, she's still alive. And as I've gotten older, the respect I've had for these women who were white, who lived in our neighborhood and looked after us grows by the day. My son and I look after her as if she's a family member because they were ostracized, they were criticized, and they were in danger because of the dedication they had made. To us. And there was no amount of money, there was no amount of anything that could have forced them to be there. And they were. The first priests to come into the Mississippi Delta, they had to smuggle out in a piano box. Because although we talk about religious terrorism today, if you were Catholic then, you were in big trouble. Big trouble. Because they had a religion and it was Baptist, maybe a Methodist, but certainly a Baptist. If you weren't it, you were something else, and that something else was not really tolerated. Now, how did I get to Connecticut? In high school, I was a geek, and there were things I wanted to do, and one of them, I wanted to be an international lawyer. And I had watched too many John Wayne movies, so when the Vietnam War came along, I felt I had to serve. So I joined the Naval Reserve in 10th grade in high school. Tried to join in 9th grade, my father refused. He says, no, wait a year, if you're still at it, I'll let you. So I joined, graduated from high school, went on active duty. But when I was a little kid in Mississippi, anybody know the name George Wallace, Faubus, Ross Barnett?
Yes.
These were all governors who stood in the schoolhouse door and said, you can't come to school here. But me being a geek, I like to think. The one thing I thought about and it came to mind that was so obvious and most people just let pass by, none of them sent their kids to those schools. They sent their kids to Harvard, to Yale, to Dartmouth. So I'm trying to figure out why are they sending their kids there and they're not going to University of Mississippi, University of Arkansas, because they wanted their kids to be raised for the world that was coming, not the world that was. And I made a decision at that time, I wanted the coming, not the was. And so I came here, got a job at Electric Boat, government contractor. How many people at that time of color were in electronics or Radcon? That'd be an interesting little project for someone. It wasn't. So after working there for a few years, saving money, working a second job, bought a house. As soon as I got a house, started school. The big reason for coming, best schools were in the Northeast. I needed a place where I could get a good education and work because I didn't have a backup person I could call and say, you know, can I have $5 grand for tuition this year? So I started at Connecticut College, graduated from Conn, and attended law school at UConn. And basically what I feel is that my parents who had third grade educations, who understood the value not only of an education, but of grit. Because anybody can get on the road, but not anybody can stay. And the thing that we do often is we say to people, if you work really, really hard, especially if we say this to kids, you work really, really hard, you're going to succeed. That is not true. You can work like a dog. When you don't succeed, the deal is you got to try again. And I've had to try more than once. And that was something that was instilled in me from the beginning.
You have to have a determination, and you've got to want something really, really badly that you're willing to make personal sacrifices go without. My dad died when I was 9. My mom died when I was 15 years old. 15 years old, I was an orphan. I went to live with my grandfather's sister, who, her signature was an X. I wanted to do something about that. So how do you encourage a person? One thing that she said when I moved in with her, she said, I want to learn how to write my name. So they were starting adult education at this time, so we got her in, and she went from first grade to third grade. She learned how to write her name, and she stopped attending school. Her greatest desire was not to have to sign anything with an X anymore. Now, I'm talking about 1957, 58. She still didn't have an education. She grew up working with a white family, taking care of their kids. She was what they would call a live-in servant. So that, and a teacher that I had, her name is Margaret Rutledge Point, said I had to do something about learning making sure that people learn, they were taught. I had teachers I didn't go to I went to an Episcopalian kindergarten, so I guess I learned enough that I didn't have to go to first grade, so I went right to second grade. My third grade teacher started teaching us Black history at a point where she was discovered she could have been fired, something terrible could have happened to her. But the one thing she said to us, that you have worth. And she started teaching Black history. There was nothing in any book, anywhere, that said that Blacks, colored Negroes had ever done anything. So, under the table, lack of a better word, she started teaching Black history to say you are and you have worth.
Yes, sir.
That inspired me that when I started teaching, I did the same thing. Didn't bother me, and as I said, when I graduated from college, I was an idealist because you couldn't tell me I couldn't take the world on after going through the sit-ins and everything. But it was not in the right place at the right time for people, but I did it. I was challenged by the Black principal as to why I would be teaching Black history.
Could I add a couple of things?
Yes.
You know, the world's crazy in a way. You know, we think now it just got that way. It was that way before. Think about where she lived and where I lived. When you're spending $3.51 on a Black kid and $35 on a white kid, when you don't even go to the trouble of building a Black high school, that you have a grade school, and you go, well, if I made it, where am I going to go? There was no high school. It was amazing, truly amazing. And if you're going to try and move ahead, you need certain tools. And where are you going to get these tools if they don't exist? And you can say, well, make your own tools if you have nothing to even start to make them with. You know, if you're lucky, you get to the 8th grade. You know, a number of years ago, I started looking through all of my old Encyclopedia Britannica yearbooks. You know, people who are my age can remember those. And I'm fanning through, looking to see how many kids were in school each year in Mississippi. And it was interesting. You would see a very large group of young Black kids in school. But by 5th grade, the numbers just started to, by 8th grade, it just plopped. But my parents, and one of the things I meant to say before, they had all these sayings, and one of them was, we don't send you to school to be educated. We send you to school to be reinforced. We educate you at home.
That's, well, a comment on education. This is really amazing, and it's wonderful that we have these different experiences. I mentioned Texas, and I heard SO, and you know Texas is the oil well state. That's where the big gusher was, actually in Beaumont, where I went to school. But in Texas, like most states, state history is required. And I remember distinctly the oil well companies, SO and Texaco and all of the big companies would donate these books to the schools for the required history. And in those history books, one of the things that a Texan is always famous for talking about is the Alamo, how important the Alamo was. And the fact is that the Texans lost at the Alamo, and they used that as a rallying cry, remember the Alamo. As a kid growing up, Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, all of those heroes of mine. I even had a coonskin cap, if you know what that is. Okay, I had one, and a gun, a vest, leather vest. I never learned in Texas that the last man in the Alamo was a black man.
Wow.
And Santana did not kill the black man because the Mexicans did not believe in slavery.
Right.
And that whole system was one where I went through my whole career early learning years, 1 through 10, and never realized that. When I came to Connecticut, New London, it wasn't long before I learned about Freeman over here at the battle, the free African American who fought here at the Battle of Groton Heights, and the significant history in this community. So just the difference in terms of what's happening in all these different states and how important education is. I remember distinctly getting books in our school that had names written in them and crossed out. These were used books. These were books from the white schools. They say sent over to the black schools.
Same here.
Same here, but we
Okay.
all took the same SAT.
LSAT, LSAT
The
for
books
you,
are,
but, yeah.
I have a problem today. I can't write in a book because books were so precious and you had to take such a good care of them.
That's right.
I can't highlight or underline a book.
Yeah, yeah, because
It's
of that
amazing.
experience.
And
yes.
growing up in Texas, did you hear about the Yellow Rose of Texas? Who was she? It was a black woman.
No, they wouldn't tell me that. They, meaning the educators. And as I mentioned, all of my educators were African-American blacks. They were all. They were not aware of that. They were concerned about me as a small kid making it through the system. And that was the love that we received in that environment, as isolated as it was, that got many of us to where we are now.
But they had to
So,
walk.
Dr.
they had to
Dr.
walk-
Mitchell, I want to ask him a question on this one. So, do you think it's important for other races to have an ethnicities to seek a deeper understanding of the African American experience?
Oh, of course.
And why do you
believe
say
it
that?
is. Because if we don't, the issue here with racism, if you will, is, one issue is fear. And it's fear of the unknown. If we do not understand each other, communicate, meet, and talk about our experiences, how are we ever going to get beyond, I just don't like you because of your skin color?
Well,
We will never get beyond that.
I agree with anything you don't know, you fear right away. But this country has a very weird, crazy history again because color didn't become an issue in slavery until America. There were slaves before, and they were all colors and what have you, but only here. And there's a book I would suggest people reading. The book is called White by Law. It's every Supreme Court case that was heard based upon trying to figure out what your ethnicity was going to be. If you were Japanese, if you were from Syria, if you were from Afghanistan, no matter where you were from, people were attempting to determine if they were going to be considered black or not. I have in my collection a book written in 1925 called The Negro Around the World. And if you look at the globe in this book, there's what was called a black girdle through the center of the earth. And so many demarcations on either side of the equator. If you were born there, you were black. I don't care if you were in the Philippines.
Jeez.
I don't care if you were in China. If you worked your way all around the world. But from 1925 till now, it's interesting how things have metamorphosized. And if you read the Supreme Court decision and the things the Supreme Court had to say about the Japanese in 1910, it was atrocious. The World War I wasn't in the offering yet, let alone World War II. But if you read that case, you say, you guys are going to be in big trouble. Big trouble. There is a documentary that I've shown the first half of called the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Right.
The Chinese are not going to forget those things. And if you pay close attention, there are a number of people from Asia and other places in the world who say that they are now of color. Because when you take and do a little math, 1.5 billion here, 1.2 billion in another country, and you work your way around, the numbers are saying some things. The world has moved on. And if you are writing history, it is his story, right? Let's make it all of our story.
Right.
Awesome. I have to say,
If I may.
yeah, please, Mr. Lancaster.
I'm here, I went to school here in New London, Connecticut. In high school, I took a course of United States history. And not once did they mention anything about the black contribution to this country.
Wow.
And it was a U.S. history course that I took.
And what year was this?
This was in 1944. But not once did they mention what a black man contributed to the history of this country. And a lot of this country was built on the backs of a black man.
When I think about the Green Book, as we talked about this extraordinary book called White by Law, but the Green Book, and I think, and the reason why I titled this the Green Book of New England, and I think of Mr. Lancaster here. And the first question that comes to my mind when I think about the Green Book is, do you feel that there's still a need for something like this? And has your family ever used any of these resources in the past?
No, we never. But there's laws now that say discrimination is out. You can't do this any longer. You can't be a bigot. You can't be a racist and have these establishments now. To go back, just the Mohegan Hotel. Now, I remember the Mohegan Hotel when I was a little boy. And the only thing a black person could do at that Mohegan Hotel was be a busboy, a maid, or a janitor.
Wow.
That was right here in New London, Connecticut. So, I mean, now they have laws that say you can't, you can't, you can't. And I think that's the greatest thing that ever happened. They say the greatest president we ever had was Harry Truman. A lot of people didn't like him, but he was my buddy. He desegregated the armed forces, and he dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, which was great. But I just to say that. But no, really, I don't think we need the Green Book, because we have the right now to go where we want to go. That's my opinion.
Okay. Please.
So, we don't need the Green Book. And I call him Uncle Buddy. Uncle Buddy said that we have the laws, but unless the laws are enforced and, let me raise that, unless people have a change of heart. The reason I'm saying that is in 1996, I retired from Electric Boat after working there for 25 years. I had 3 white friends who took me out for my retirement dinner. I'm talking 1996. We went to a restaurant. I love Italian food. My kids were very, very sad when one day my oldest daughter came home and, "Mommy, what's your favorite food?" So I said, "Italian." She said, "Not soul food." I said, "I'm sorry, babe, but it's Italian." So my friends took me to an Italian restaurant. Great lasagna. After we had dessert and coffee, then that's when things went downhill. My 3 friends, my colleagues, were served in china cups with a blue rim going around it. I'll never forget it. They served me a mug. I don't know if you've ever seen any of the old factory movies where the cups and that nasty looking thing. They served me in a cup and a saucer like that, and they had 3 I couldn't believe it. So I called the waitress over, and so I felt sorry for my colleagues, my friends, because the first thing that out of their mouth is, "I'm sorry, we didn't pay attention." I didn't mean to sound mean, but I said to them, "That's because you don't have to."
Jeez. Wow.
They didn't have to pay attention, but I did. I called the waitress over, and her statement to me was so insulting until I am so glad, thank God for Dr. Martin Luther King and nonviolence. She insulted me by saying that there were not any more cups and saucer in the restaurant. So I said, Can you get the manager or the owner, please? Can I talk to them? At that time, I don't know if you remember, in the New London Day, they had a food editor, Lee White. I don't know if you remember Lee White. And she would give you 1 fork, 2 forks, 3 forks, and 4 if the food was that great. So I said, you either let me talk to the owner or the manager, or I am going to first call Lee White. And then I have some friends who still know how to picket and march.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
I got to talk to the owner by phone, and he said to come back, and he was apologizing, and it was not the policy of the restaurant, but somebody was lying because it was a deliberate act. It was deliberate. Now, to this day, the restaurant is still open, and I'm waiting for something in me to tell me to go back to see if they're still doing, and I believe I'm going to do that. I haven't done it all these years. But I know that I am going to go back. The same thing happened to me to us at a Westbrook restaurant. This time it wasn't the dishes, it was the glasses.
Oh my gosh.
The white people had glasses, same color. They were brown, you know, the nasty brown color they used to serve in restaurants. But the difference was, those of us who were color had glasses that had like bumps on them. So you could distinguish the difference between the smooth glass and the glasses with bumps. And we were served water, drinks out of the glasses that. It has to be a change of heart. You
can't
can have
legislate
all
law.
the laws in the world, but unless somebody's hearts and attitudes are changed, we're still gonna be going around, we're gonna be like the square bear, going around, not getting anywhere. That's what my grandmother used to say.
Lonnie, you want to add it?
Yeah, the unfortunate
Please.
thing is you can't legislate the hearts and minds of people. And the biggest thing that has impacted, I think, how people feel, the young have helped. Because racism, sexism, whatever kind of ism it is, it's not going to die a natural death. It will not die a natural death. Because if it was going to die a natural death, it would have been dead by now.
Yes.
But somehow people keep reinfecting other folk with it, and the young. And a good example, 2 years ago, Cheerios, one of those companies, had an add-on with an integrated family. The father and the mother was white, and they caught all this flack.
Yeah.
But their sales didn't go down. Now you see a lot of commercials like that.
Yes.
That's true.
And once it becomes advantageous and cash is involved, for some strange reason, hearts and minds change.
Yes.
That's true. That is very true.
Yeah.
You know, Branch Rickey came to Jackie Robinson and said, Jackie, I want to hire you. And he said, but these people are going to do all kinds of foul things. They're going to throw stuff at you. They're going to say nasty things and whatever. And you got to be able to stand all of this. And I need you. And he says, are you my man? And Jackie goes, yes. But what Branch Rickey and a bunch of other guys has noticed, that every year when they had the Negro World Series, those people dressed up in suits and finery and filled that stadium.
Yeah.
And they, I mean, am I kidding?
No.
You go, wait a minute, they spend that much money? Yes. Yes. And at the bottom of the tally, when you add it up, always count the dollars and cents. And
Now,
it has a way of changing things.
Mr. Braxton, you mentioned that the young have helped. But when I think about, I work with a lot of young people, and I hear the N-word used very loosely
And
in
whose
a
fault's
variety
that?
of settings,
And whose fault's that?
right? And so what comes to my mind is, how do you think we can educate the masses about the N-word? Because they'll say to me, they'll say, Mr. Booker, there's a difference between N-I-G-G-E-R and N-I-G-G-A. So is there really a difference? I'm asking my panel here. I really want to know. And how can we educate them?
Just in the pronunciation.
That's it. It's just a
I'll ask
Just the
you this.
pronunciation.
I will ask you this question.
Yeah, please.
I shoot you and kill you, and I stab you and kill you.
Are you
Dead, dead.
Dead.
Exactly, exactly.
So
If you want to stop it, let them hear him speak. If you can say it after hearing him speak and the cost he's paid for me not to hear it,
true.
that's,
That's the
no,
difference.
I would never dishonor my grandparents or my parents or other people. You know, my father,
Sure.
who was a really interesting guy, he had a set of rules. He would take anything, hear anything, and you could just abuse him, and he would keep his tongue and keep his temper. But when it came to my sister and I, he didn't like being bothered. My father cleared land for a living. And I remember on occasion, we'd bring the wood, these logs, to the mill. And they would do what was called scale the log. You take the length of the log and across the middle circumference to figure out how many board feet. They're kind of cheat by not going to the middle. So you pull up to the little mill shack with your load, and the guy would come out and check it. Well, when we would come out of the woods and the ground would be soft, what have you, the truck would sink, you'd get stuck. So my father kept an axe stuck in the logs that he would cut a sapling, whatever, and throw under the tires. So we come up to the mill one day with a load of logs. There's no one around. So my father gets out of the truck, I get out. He walks around in the mill yard looking for one of the guys, and these were all white men. So one of the workers there came out from somewhere and starts saying nasty things to me using the N-word. Now my father's a very big man, muscular.
Yeah.
The guy is facing me and my father's behind him. My father sticks his hand into the logs and pulls out the axe. He raises this axe over his head like this, and I know he's gonna kill that man. And my heart's pounding, and don't ever let anyone tell you your life flashes before you. It does not. You don't have time. And I think that this guy looks at my face and sees the look I have on my face. He turns, faces my father, and it was like, oh my God. The guy who owned the mill came out, diffused it, but he never came out to the truck again. It was never mentioned, but it taught me a lesson. It taught me a lesson that there are things you will stand for, that there are things you will die for. And my father demonstrated to me in that quick lesson, you don't have to stand for everything. And there are people who are worth everything to you. And also, he kind of taught my sister and I at the same moment that you have a responsibility to those people too.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Lancaster, what are your feelings about you hearing young people now using the N-word so loosely?
I don't like it. I don't approve of it myself. And if anybody does it around me, I call it their attention really quick. But also, you know, the Jews were called, the Irish were called, the Italians were called. But one thing they had over us, see, they could change their name, but we can't change our color. See, so when they use that word against us, they know it's derogatory. But I don't stand for that word. I don't let anybody use it around me. And if they do, I bring it to their attention right quick. I even get to the point sometime I'll grab them at my age. And believe me, I can grab them. If you don't believe me, ask my kids. But no, you know, that's one thing. And the man, well, they call me this, they call me that. I said, yeah, but you can change your name. I can't change my color.
Thinking about Dr. Mitchell, what are some of the more current challenges or obstacles that your family has faced when it comes to like your profession? And because I think of you, you were the first black superintendent in Groton.
Yes, sir.
And that's true. So what were some of the challenges that you faced, and how were you able to overcome some of those obstacles
Well,
in this area?
I go back to what I think is necessary across all of our discussions, and that is education, the importance of education. And that even goes to the use of the N-word, even though young people wanted to get away with using that, thinking they're desensitizing, when actually it's a money-making issue because they're being rewarded by the system to grade themselves and each other. That's unfortunate, and it has to do with education and role models. Like Attorney Braxton said, his father demonstrated an important lesson right there, that you have to be able to stand up for something and willing to die for something.
Right.
And I think that's what's missing, and it's because of what has happened across the system to black men in the system. But in terms of the obstacles, there are many of the same difficulties occurring now. Housing is still an issue, even though we're not calling it
Right.
selective placement, and job attainment is still an issue for a lot of us.
Absolutely.
It's not as easy as you would think. It still requires a lot of work and it requires preparing yourself. So I see that as very important and something that we need to do.
Please.
But we've, this genie or monster, whatever you want to call it, didn't stay in the bottle. It's expanded. America's had an issue about race for a long time. But now it also has an issue about class. And see, when we think about what happened to us 100 years ago, 150 years ago, but you speed ahead to right after World War II, we were working, getting jobs, buying houses, trying to live the American dream. And very quickly, around 56, 57, they made more 57 Chevrolets than anything, but right after that, the economy started to tank. But they were building those roads leading out of the cities to the suburbs.
That's right.
And they were using everybody's tax dollar for that.
Wow.
And as the economy started to change and jobs started to change, the people in inner city were the canaries in the mine. So that money taken out, the jobs disappearing and what have you, it's like, well, you should do better or find this. It wasn't. It was just disappearing too fast.
Right.
Now, where's the fastest growing poverty? Fastest growing poverty, suburbia. Because before you could work one job, pay all of your bills, you had a kid, 2 kids, wife stayed home till Junior and Sally were 6 or 7 years old. No longer the case.
Right.
No longer the case. When you have 1980, Ronald Reagan came in, 1% of the American population had 9% of the wealth. When George Bush left, 1% of the population had 24.8% of the wealth. So if I enlarge my piece of the pie, what happens to everybody else's? I'm a real capitalist, not a greedy person. But greed's kind of taken over where you can go from, I brought home $82 a week, saved $5, 1969. That's a $49,000 a year job now. How many people with a high school education make that kind of money with full benefits? So what's happened is people are very, very quickly working their way backwards.
That's right.
So where are we going to be in 20 years? There'll be conversations like this, but there will be some different people at this table.
Absolutely. For the viewers in the audience, what words of encouragement will you have for some of the individuals who are listening to this show and they're saying, maybe, some people may say, well, I don't know why Black history, why do we need Black history? Why are we having these discussions? I feel that everything is perfectly fine. I get along with everyone. I'm not having any issues. Life is good. Why is it important that we have these discussions? If you can maybe shed a light for the listeners and the viewers out here as we close out and open up to the audience. Why is it important that we take the time out and have conversations such as this?
Well, I say know who you are, and I always believe that, and all my life, I'm somebody. And I don't kowtow to anyone. If you just give me the opportunity, that's all I ask. Give me the opportunity to earn, and I'll earn it. And I don't think myself lower than anyone. I know I can't legislate love. I don't want you to love me, just give me the opportunity. That's all.
That's right.
I'm not a betting woman, but I'm putting everything that's in me, that's authentic, on a new generation, because personally, I think the older us are going to be going around in circles doing the same thing, and we're going to have this conversation next February. I am working, and so is Lonnie, with young people. It's a focus group called Encountering Differences. I think if you and I, who are older, can just really be authentic and really just say what's on your heart and what you really, really mean, I have reached a point in my life, last Thursday I turned 78.
Wow.
Thank you.
Real good.
And
Wow.
I am so glad to be working with these young people. When they ask me to give them advice as to how, what to say, I said, I'm not going to tell you anything. I want you to learn from life and then get your own voice. Because if I tell you what to do, you just be repeating. And that's the problem, is if we leave these kids alone and let them decide for themselves and not interject some of our old feelings that will never, ever go away, and just let them be authentic and speak truth to power. I think I'm hinging. I don't want to say I'm betting, but I'm betting on these young people to make a difference. I am so hopeful. That's the reason why I work with these young people. Last year I had 5 from East Lyme, and Lonnie had, I don't know how many he had. And this year I'm working with 5 kids, Fisher Island.
Wow.
Totally different outlook, totally different, because they're isolated from the rest of the population. But they have a voice too. Last year I had one of the young persons I was working with that she thought that all of the problems had disappeared because President Obama was elected and he was black. That was her reality.
Wow.
Last year, she just graduated from high school. So it's what I'm trying to do is I believe is that God's given me this little corner to make a difference. And I'm going to do everything within my power. The thing about it is the kids that I'm working with, and we were working with, they never hardly had a relationship with an African American. They came into my home for the first time last year. The same thing, this coming Tuesday, they're coming back again. But they had never had no conversation. The kids from East Lyme, there were 5 of them, 3 whites and 2 African American, that they didn't even speak to each other, and they were going to the same high school.
Yeah.
So I am trusting and hoping that the next generation will make a difference. We can make a difference, but we've got to change our attitude, those of us who've been here for a while, and we have to have a change of heart. And I believe if we become authentic and stop saying one thing to my face and another thing when I walk away, or when you are with your group, you say one thing, and then when you're with me, you say another thing.
Wow.
Just be authentic, and it'll make a difference.
Thank you. Those were very reassuring and refreshing words for me, because I believe, and you hit upon it, and I thank you for the work you're doing, because I see, again, education as the key to the success. And I believe it is in the hands of the young people. But I also believe that we, to a certain extent, have to show them the way.
Guide, yeah.
Show them.
Because if we don't, then they may get the wrong information or misinformation that will lead them to perpetuate some of the thinking that has us in this situation right now. So I think it's a result. I think that we can change the future. It is with the young people, and I think that we have to give them some support and guidance along the way, even if it's as simple as opening up your home and bringing students in. You would not believe that in today's society right now, there's still pockets in our community of students who do not have or have not had an experience with an African American or another person. When Attorney Braxton talks about the percentage of people around the world of color, it's like the water of this world. If you think about this earth, the majority of the earth is water. The majority of the people in this world are of color. And we need to be able to understand how the world has changed and how we can make it better. And we can only do that by talking to each other, listening, sharing experiences in a non-threatening way, and then remembering when you hear that N-word that is offensive to you, and if you don't respond, will give a younger person the wrong impression. It's up to us to respond when appropriately and show some guidance to younger people. Most groups educate their children at home to a certain extent, and this is before we had a formal education system. Kids in a certain family and of a certain faith know that because they got some instruction at home. I'm saying we need to do the same thing.
Absolutely.
Well, unfortunately, we are all educating our kids at home. Kids born, just like this sheet of paper, pure, clean, nothing on it. Unfortunately, we write on it every day. Sometimes we are unaware of what we're writing and failing to understand the damage we're doing when we're writing. Now, if we really, really hold ourselves responsible, within 2 generations, things would change immensely. I have a lab where I work because I work with juveniles, and there are a number of teachers here. Now, you put a child in a class. That kid, you say, Johnny, sit down. Johnny, sit down. Then you go, yell at the top of your voice, Johnny, sit down. He sits down instantly. That kid's coming from a home where everybody's yelling. That kid has learned, you want my attention, you yell. You know what? My name for kids, Xerox machine, because they don't do anything but copy. When they're born, they don't know anything. And you talk about the world, many years ago, I had an aunt and uncle left Mississippi, went to Detroit. They're living in Detroit in this house. They got a neighbor. She liked to walk all the time to the store, and the reason she liked to walk because she passed this little pet shop, and they always had puppies in the window. So she'd peep in the window and wave and smile at the puppies. One day she walks by there. She looks in the window. They got a parrot. Parrot sitting on a perch. He looks over at the woman and says, "Hey, lady." She jumps. "You're really ugly." Oh, God, now she gets upset. This goes on for about a week. So she keeps looking at this parrot, and then she goes by this next day. The parrot looks and says, "Hey, lady. Hey, you're really, really, really ugly." She was so upset. She ran into the pet shop. She found the owner and says, "Look, that bird says that to me one more time. I'm suing you and taking your store." He's all nervous and afraid. He goes, okay. He'll never say it again. She comes by the next day, looks in the window. Parrot looks at her, cocked his head back, said, "Hey, you know." Now you laugh at that joke.
Oh my God.
That parrot was in her head. That parrot had convinced her because he had said it so much that she believed it. And we've had people say rotten, nasty things and degrade people for so long, especially in today's world, it becomes the standard fare. And if you read any scientific study about how we interact and behave, we will believe the worst faster than we will believe the truth. And if you take those two things together and you combine them, you have today on your hands.
I know I'm somebody. That's exactly where we are.
And he said the truth. So when you think about the truth, it's proven. Scientifically, it has been proven that we are genetically the same, 99.5%.
Yes, sir.
And what separates us is just 0.5%. That's it. When you look at the state of Connecticut, there are 169 towns. 20 towns or people of color are all concentrated. So you have 149 towns in the state of Connecticut that are predominantly all white. And what's interesting about that is that when you meet someone, and you just meet someone, and you're not, for example, I'll take you, Tom. Stand up for a minute. My color is not going to rub on his skin, right? But because we don't interact with one another, we have this preconceived notion that this person is different. That's that 0.5%. And it's been proven through anthropology and through studies that we all came from Africa. And we all had to migrate. And the reason why people look different is because they had to adapt to climate. The Cheddar Man, which was that fossil that was discovered in 1908, proves that's what happened in Europe as well. So look it up. It's called the Cheddar Man, 1908. When they dug up the fossil, it's 200,000 years old. The skin pigment, because of our technology, the technology we have today, show that the skin pigment was darker. The eyes were blue. So it shows that we had to evolve, and that's the reason why we evolved over time. So what we're discussing today is what? 5%. The differences. That's why we have to have Black History Month, Native American History Month, Hispanic Heritage Month. But since this is Black History Month, and we are celebrating Black History Month, I want you to think about this. Gospel, R&B, rap, rock and roll, pop, jazz, ragtime, blues, folk, bebop, even country music was all created around black people. Black people contribute to that music. When you turn the light bulb, think of Lewis Latimer, who created the filament in the light bulb. Fireproof Safe, the Super Soaker, the video game console. I just learned today, I just met the gentleman who created the ringtone on your cell phone, Andre Gray. I just met him today.
He's in Connecticut.
And he's in Connecticut, correct. And he has 14 patents. And 3D film graphics, the blood bank, Charles and Richard Drew died from his own invention.
Yeah.
That's right.
The elevator design, the pacemaker control unit, the railway telegraph, air conditioning unit, the cell phone, Henry Sampson. This Netflix film is coming out soon on the discovery of Henry Sampson, how he created the cell phone, but he didn't get credit for it. Peanut butter, potato chips, the traffic light. It's so interesting though, when you think about something so simple. You're on your and you're talking about, boy, those people. Oh my God. And you come to a traffic light and someone's talking about those people, and I think of Gary Morgan. But because of our ignorance, because we're not exposed to other cultures and understanding how we all contribute. All of us contribute. That's why education is so powerful. So when Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa, said, education is the most powerful we can use to change the world, that's what he was talking about. So thank you, Groton Public Library. Thank you for having this wonderful event. If you have questions, comments, please talk to them. Please ask them. Because we have to continue to network, and we have to continue to move our communities in a positive direction. And I agree with you, Florence. I really do, Reverend Clark. I totally agree with you. And I agree with you, Dr. Mitchell, and I agree with you, Mr. Lancaster. And Lonnie Braxton, we know you're the brain behind the history of this area.
Yes, sir.
Okay, yes, you are.
Amen.
You and Tom, you need to write a book together. All right? I'm putting it out there now. But the reality is that we have to work together. We can be a model for the state of Connecticut, this area. We really can be a model, but we have to believe in it. It's just as simple as when I shake someone's hand and kind of go exactly to what Florence Clark was saying. You know, don't smile in someone's face and not genuinely mean it, because people can feel it. We know. Everyone knows, like, if you're being fake. Then we walk away and we go, yeah, they're not really a white ally.
Yeah.
We know they're not going to really hire me, or they're not going to give me an opportunity. You understand where I'm coming from? Because this is the state where John Brown came from. This is the state where John Brown came from. And he was a man that was on a mission. We don't really talk about Moses. Okay? But thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.